What's up, everyone? It's Zox. Now, we had an absolutely insane live stream where we just tiered every single unit in the game for PvP. Now, I was lucky enough to actually participate and compete in the most recent invitational, and I got a lot farther than I thought I was actually going to, but it was really cool to see a lot of different things that transpired. I was able to try out some like neat, nifty things that, again, just to see if it worked or not. And so, of course, that was a great experience. Now, of course, with this live stream, I will have it linked down below so you guys can see all of the deliberating and the different conversations that we had that kind of led us to ultimately where we're at with this tier list. Now, of course, with that, we're going to be starting out with our triple S, going into obviously our double SS and thereon and so forth. With the triple S being the units that had the overall dominating power, just the most utility, and honestly is the most suited for the current meta in CBT4. Now, keep in mind that things are subject to change, so we will be revisiting this tier list in the near future as we get closer to the official release of the game, and maybe potentially seeing some balances or shifts in units kits there, okay? So let's go ahead and let's get right into it, starting off with the very first unit that was tiered, which was Veronica, okay? Now, Veronica here, right, and I'm just moving around so you guys can see, Veronica was actually a pretty nasty unit. I think she ended up, throughout the duration of the tournament, you start to see her getting pre-banned a lot more often. I think a lot of people went into the tournament initially thinking it was just going to be Lily and Doki Doki that were getting banned, but you started seeing units like herself and a few others getting banned quite a bit. I think one of the craziest interactions I've seen in the tournament was actually when you were able to use her skill 3. Her skill 3 is basically where she's able to steal a buff from the target, and then she can redistribute that buff to her entire party. She actually stole Beoten's unique buff, and that buff basically enabled her to become a reviver, or essentially, right? Like, so she took a revive ability away from Beoten, gave it to a party, and a team comp that normally would not have been able to resurrect now was able to resurrect with the Underworld Flower, which is huge. And then, of course, they got the strike, push, and all the values that you would get from that unique buff that Beoten has. And so that was like an absolutely insane piece of value that you got to see essentially in the tournament. And I thought that that was something, of course, that earned her spot. Like, no matter what, I was like, after I seen that, I was like, oh, this chick's broken, right? Like, there was no way she wasn't getting that value. And then on top of that, she also gives shield too. So she's really, really good. That with the attack break and the skill 1, right? So she gives you a lot of value. Definitely a unit you'd use in Classic Arena. Definitely a unit you'd use in RTA, 1000%. Now, of course, with that, we also have Tiamat. Now, Tiamat, I think, also was another unit on the list that became a high pre-banned unit. It was very scary to fight her if you really honestly didn't have control over the fight. One of the units that could easily ramp and just completely 180 the fight. She was essentially the defensive tank damage dealer, right? Like, I mean, that's just what it was. And not defensive scaling, but she's just a super tanky support, right? Or tanky like support DPS. Like, she just had a lot of values, right? So obviously you have the AoE taunt with her. You also have the AoE shield that she gives. And then of course you have the Dragon Mother form, where the Dragon Mother form is going to be hitting you even harder with the amount of HP consumption factored in to that, like, you know, that matter. And she's of course going to be able to restore her own HP. But yeah, absolutely 180ing teams, completely taking people off of the freaking map, which was just insane. So I used her quite a bit when I had the chance to actually use her, and she did perform quite well. Now, coming up next in Triple S, we obviously have Hellkid. I think Hellkid is probably the talk of the town at this point. A lot of people actually want to see him get completely nerfed because he has the Shroud Barrier, which I think we've all know at this point is one of the most oppressive abilities in the game. Again, attack scaler with the Shroud Barrier, which is just a ton of shield, which also has built-in immunity. Now, on top of that, because his abilities do attack, he also can do quite a bit of damage, and it's quite a scary amount of damage on top of that. So if you give him a defense break or any sort of damage scaling ability, erosion, whatever it is, he's going to hit you really, really hard. Now, he can also inflict an attack break as well. And then the other gimmick with him is that the Shroud Barrier essentially increases that overall damage. So it's just so insane with him having that ability. But I will say, there were some pretty good counter actions or counter units that you could use against him. So yes, there were, and he is counterable, but I think it still doesn't take away from like his omnipotent like power that he has that just makes him super OP for all the things that he brings to the table. Now next up here we have Bealton. Bealton, of course, is one of our AoE revivers in the game. I think the gimmick that she has makes her extremely potent, makes her, again, comparatively to like what you would see for PvE, she's absolutely bonkers in PvP. The other thing is too with her is that she's able to give an attack up crit damage buff to your entire party. And then of course she has the underworld flower buff. And that's essentially going to be the buff that revives. Now she also is able to reduce cooldowns as well. And so that's something that can actually be really, really huge to allowing you to be able to get your skills much quicker, right? And so that with also being able to strike prep push with her skill 1 is another massive thing that she's also able to contribute. So she's just one of the ultimate supports. Bealton is another unit that you might see get banned quite a bit, depending on what roster or what units that the other opposing person is utilizing. So she's really, really good. Next up, we have Rahu. Rahu, again, defense scaling unit. I think one of the scariest things about Rahu is long fights, right? Like longer duration on fights. He's going to be building up that Wrath buff, which is just increasing his defense essentially, which is inherently increasing his damage, his tankiness. And then on top of that, it's also making it to where he's able to have more stacks accessible to be able to remove debuffs off of the team more consistently. He's also able to proc his own defense break. His single target assist is just insane. And so with that, you will progressively see him start to hit harder. He's like one of the very few characters with a skill 1 that could just hit you for like 15k just because he feels like it on a crit, right? So he's absolutely insane. Again, he gives the defense up to your entire party as well. So he is another unit that I would say is at the top of meta. Definitely a unit that just has a lot of value. Now, of course, with that, I would say that those are like some of the initial showcased units that you just kind of almost seen in every single comp. There are a couple of others that we're going to talk about as well, but they were in almost every comp. If you've seen them, you had to deal with them. So learning how to operate against those units is just so crucial. Now, of course, with that, we also have to put Obel in there. Obel definitely got used quite a bit, which I was pretty happy to see. Obel is great. DOT, CC, stun locking, which is huge. I think the biggest thing, though, that puts Obel in the top is that he has the opportunity to also potentially convert a player's buffs. And in the current climate of meta that we're dealing with, this is actually key, right? Like him being able to buff convert, change that into damage, also allowed you to not necessarily have a ton of damage. If you didn't have it, you could just work down the team, try to lock them down with stuns, etc., and they would still be taking massive amounts of damage over time, which is huge. So I feel like, again, also with skill 1, he's also able to land more DOT. He was just great for that. He performed extremely well. You've seen him on the Codex and Magic build, so he was using his skill 3 twice in a row. Dude was insane. Right. Now, of course, we also got Kraken. We did get to see him showcase where he just popped off. Kraken definitely is able to lock down a team. Just like Obel, I feel like him and Obel are like in the same boat. The freeze with the strike prep pushback, though, is the biggest thing for his gimmick, as well as the deep freeze. Now, the reason why freeze is so OP is because freeze makes it to where a character cannot gain any strike prep. When a character is under CC, they still can gain turn meter. When you're under freeze, regular stun, you can still gain turn meter, but when you're under a freeze, you don't move on the turn meter bar. So that allows you to just essentially free rotate without actually having to worry about them getting a turn and even coming out of the freeze. And so that's something that, it's like any strike prep push. You still can rotate, but you just, again, you don't gain any strike prep for that. So it's huge. It lasts for 1 turn. And that's something that is just like absolutely insane. Now, the other thing is too, is that if the character hits a 0 on the strike prep bar, then they actually have a 100% chance of being frozen by him. And then of course with the deep freeze basically makes it to where if the character's I think unaffected HP is below 50% at the start of their turn, it'll essentially increase the duration by an additional turn. So deep frozen is huge to allow you to keep those rotations going, just locking down the team, and you can basically just have free reign to do whatever you want. That on top of a defense down in the skill 1 is just absolutely insane for him. Next up, we have Lily. This was one of the 2 units that I think a lot of people just typically thought and did ban. Lily actually started to not get banned as much throughout the tournament once people started kind of getting a little bit more comfortable with what was more bannable. Lily is still a problem though. She has an AoE that's able to do a pretty respectable amount of damage. Twin Trick is going to not only extend all of the cooldowns on the opposing side by 1 turn, but it immediately resets all cooldowns for allies as well that are under the Twin Trick, which is going to be also strike prep pushing by 40%. And then on top of that, it's going to also give her the opportunity to rotate into her skill 2, which is going to allow her to be able to give a speed up buff and a crit damage buff to the target that is under Twin Trick. So yeah, it's huge. Like a lot of the things that that she's able to do is like absolutely insane. The strike prep push that she also has in the skill 1 also is going to enable a 100% chance to assist. This is all considering too, guys, when we're talking about these units at max, when they have max skill ups, things of that nature. That's the value that you're getting there. So she's huge, one of the top supports in the game in my opinion, and then she's pretty respectable in the damage department. She still has some, which is nice. So really like her quite a bit. We also have Doki Doki too. Doki Doki, again, just for lack of better words, just speed rotator. She also gives you some damage there. I think the biggest thing with Doki Doki as well, and why she just kind of works in the current meta, is that she also is going to not only increase damage, not only increase speed, but she also is going to be able to increase strike prep, right? So she's moving you along the turn meter gauge. She allows you to be able to, essentially rotate on the turn meter gauge on your own. And then she has, I would say, the biggest ability that makes her work is the backup ability, which is going to allow her to be able to purify debuffs. That is just one of the most annoying things, because consuming 1 stack of this, which I think stacks up to 6 times, it will purify all of the debuffs on a target. So you can land 6 debuffs, she will purify all of them. And that's something that's just like, again, makes her extremely annoying to have to deal with. And the reason why you typically seen her her banned, because if you're doing anything DOT, she just kind of cooks it. If she gets a turn, she's going to cook it, right? Sania, I think, was one of the most surprising units for me personally, just because I don't think it was what her kit did that surprised me. It was how hard it was to kill her. She was extremely tanky, really hard to kill. She had a great performance in this international tournament. Like, she did great. The thing with her too is she was usually paired up on a team comp that either made her the sole reviver or with another reviver, or healer, for example. Like, she was with Ling Lao quite a bit. But the all protection is huge because that basically increases the max HP, and it goes up to 3 stacks on that, and it cannot be dispelled, which is huge. She also is able to, with the skill 3, again, able to revive and then reducing their cooldowns by 1 turn. Her passive is also pretty huge because she also is going to be purifying debuffs, healing the unit with the lowest amount of HP, and then her healing efficiency goes up for every 1% HP she loses. So keeping her at lower HP values as people are trying to do damage, she only becomes a more potent healer. And that's really something that's, hard to deal with and annoying to deal with, considering how tanky she can be. And then you have the strike prep push in the skill 1, which is, like, again, huge. Hoyan, simply put, killing everyone. No, I'm kidding. No, but honestly, using her, she was the hardest hitting unit in the entire tournament, just in PvP in general. She's going to be one of the hardest hitting units. Absolutely insane, hard to deal with, has death prevention built into her kit, kind of forces you to proc her skill 3. If she's hitting the right target, she's going to completely delete them. They cannot be resurrected, is another part of her gimmick. And then for every time that she kills, she also gets a 40% increase to her attack. So if she kills 1 person, that's 40%. She kills 2, that's another 40%, and it stacks. So now she's at 80. She kills 3, she's going to definitely kill the last person, because now she has a 120% buff on top of a 480% multiplier that also is going to be ignoring some defense, right? So again, super huge unit. I felt like she performed extremely well as well. We also had Heinrich. Heinrich was actually really insane. The biggest thing for him wasn't just so much that he was just a damage dealer, or because that's what he is, but he's an anti-heal, buff blocks. He has really, really great, like, just abilities that just work really well with each other. And then the last words, he's actually able to increase the chances of him critting and as well as how much crit damage he can deal. I think that, again, an excellent unit for PvP. And he definitely earned his spot in Triple S because he just has a lot of utility. So yeah, I can't knock him for anything. Like Heinrich is great. Next up, we have Silence. Silence is another unit that I feel like was definitely problematic, especially if you didn't really have anything to deal with her. I think the biggest thing with her is that she decreases attack and crit rate. And then on top of that, she also grants an ability called Aqua Shield. And that is something that is going to allow her to be able to not only absorb damage, so it does give shield, right? That in conjunction to the Rain Curtain absorbs damage. It reflects 75% of the absorbed damage, and then it also increases the effect res of the entire party. Well, everybody's gonna have it. The effect res by 30%, which is huge, right? So dealing with her, the end of the turn, you're always going to be seeing this being reapplied. So you just have constant shields with her, which I would say is even better than health in some cases, because you don't have to worry about the gimmicks of RTA's timer kicking in where it decreases HP. It does not affect shield. So that on top of the fact that she can proc a dot, silence, or oblivion, which is basically a debuff to triggering passive. So it's anti-passive effects, right? Huge, absolutely insane. Now, outside of that, we have Lilith here. Again, I think Lilith showed her promise. I think one of the things with her, though, she's kind of at the lower end of Triple S for me. She either worked or she didn't, right? I think with the current meta, if she's caught in any situation where there's any immunity up, then her abilities just don't work. I think that that's the only thing that kind of mitigates her in some cases. If there's immunity up, then she just doesn't get to do anything, which is like a big part of what makes her work, is being able to land the Graceful Mischief, being able to rotate, detonate it, you're stunning, all that stuff. Other than that, she's absolutely amazing, really solid for PvP, especially at a higher performance level. Ling Lao. Okay, Ling Lao, I think, showed a lot more promise. We were having a discussion about her value. I wasn't initially too sure about what her value is going to look like at endgame, but I think this, they showed in this tournament that she definitely was a high in value unit. I think, again, her being paired up, she had to kind of be paired up with someone else. So she was usually paired up with either a Sania, or you've seen her with Biotin, or you've seen her with Veronica. You always seen her with someone else that was able to do some sort of sustain. That's another reason why she's kind of sort of at the bottom for me. But again, the healing, the purifying, the healing efficiency increases, the immunity coverage, you just can't pass that up in certain situations. There are a lot of situations where I would even say, for some of my fight style one, stall comps, she's huge on those teams. She helps out a ton. So again, Ling Lao is a day 7 login unit. Everybody's gonna love her. Next up, we have Close. I think Close kind of faces some of the same issues that potentially Lilith does, but when she works, she works. The defense break is huge. Again, the skill 2 is a redistributing strike prep and absorbing it. But again, if the team has immunity, then she's not really able to take advantage of that ability. I think also too, it's also more of an intent with cleaving with Close, which you didn't really get to see too much cleaving. You kind of might notice that there's not a ton of DPSs, like just pure attack scaling DPSs in the ranking for Triple S, just because it was a lot of things that were just straight up mitigating it. So keep in mind, this is pets also playing into effect as well. Just the units alone is one thing, but again, pets are predominantly a thing that you have to consider in PvP. So again, we'll have a separate tier list coming for the pets. I'll be kind of talking about that in the future, but that's that, right? Now, next up, we have Dorothy the Wisher. Dorothy the Wisher, I think, was one of the underrated SRs that a lot of people realize, holy crap, this is a great SR, and she can definitely work at this point in the game. She is one of the newest SRs that were added into the game. She is a crit support, so basically what she's able to do, crit buff, she's able to give AoE to your entire party with life leech, which is huge, which basically just converts 30% of the damage that you deal into HP. And then on top of that, she's also able to purify debuffs. And the thing is if her abilities crit, then it becomes 2 debuffs that she removes AoE. You have the strike prep push in this skill 2, which is pretty huge. It will be 50% with a crit damage buff, but if it crits, it will then also push it to 100%. And keep in mind, before it even crits, even at the 50%, you still get a cooldown to 1 skill. So she's huge, absolutely insane. And then, of course, you have the strike prep push by 30% in the skill 1. So Dorothy the Wisher, I felt like definitely deserved it. She performs extremely well, and she just offers a lot of value for keeping your team in a place to either rotate and just giving them great buffs, keeping debuffs off of them, right? Now, getting into double S. So these are some of our units that were definitely really strong. You've seen that they have some sort of potency. And even we've kind of deliberated and kind of talked about some of the values of what units would work really well with some of the units in the higher tiers, because you might not always have, and I would even argue working your way up, you're not going to be having full teams of just, you know, Veronica, Tiamat, Hellkid, Bealton. That's not going to be the case, right? You're going to actually be mixing in certain units because, again, skill investment is also another big component of what also was giving these units that extremely high value. So Dinah, again, we've talked about her before, but she's going to be great. Any sort of like damage increaser, you know, the erosion vulnerability is huge for her. I think that actually helps out quite a bit, especially whether you're trying to do like any sort of nuking or like just high damage, you know, high damaging setup. She's going to be able to help out quite a bit with that. I think the other thing with her too is that she also offers a defense break, which is pretty big outside of the, you know, 30% damage vulnerability that she also is able to give. And then on top of that, the erosion is another thing as well that's really big. So erosion basically makes it to where the next crit damage, it consumes 1 stack to essentially take the additional real damage equal to 40% of the attacker's attack, and then it increases the attacker's strike prep by 8%. So again, a good movement ability. She also can still strike prep with her S1, so she can like just make somebody move back and then gain it. So she's huge. Now next up we have Viper. Viper for me was a huge unit, definitely one of the top dispellers that I felt like was able to counteract some of the things in meta. Again, the big thing with him is really just that, counteracting, you know, or counterattacking with his skill 3, which is just a massive AoE like purification or dispel, which again won me some matches. So I got to say, it was really, really nice to be able to use him. He worked extremely well, and mine wasn't even on a damage build. I had mine like on like a more tankier kind of bruiser build, and he still did an amazing job. Now we have Shiada. Shiada was actually increased in value. I feel like she performed way better. She hits way harder. Again, with what she's able to do, again, you know, she has the, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the soul ability. It's called Soul Flame, I think it is. Yeah, Soul Flames is what it's called. And basically what it does is that every time it evolves, it will increase her attack and her crit damage. Like I think it's 18% for her attack and 10% for her crit damage. And it evolves up to 3 times, and it is undispellable. So I was able to, in one of my fights, I actually able to kind of showcase her damage. I almost clean kill. Actually, I think I did kill an entire team almost. It was like 2 out of the 4 units. And then it was like almost a clean up there. Against the Reviver meta is again, one of the reasons why I had to shift her down, just because it wasn't like a insane cleave, just because she does require some build up. If she would have been probably built up to the Soul Flame 3 stacks, that probably would have been a clean kill. But again, it's just the matter of the fact is just, it just takes some time to ramp her, and that's just kind of one of the catch-22s to her. She does inflict a AoE defense break, which is another huge reason as to why she just works, and so she's really, really good, right? I feel like, again, she also can still buffs, so she offers a pretty solid amount of value. Messiah is in double S. Again, I feel like Messiah kind of faces somewhat of the same issue. Cleave was just kind of mitigated against. He can still work as a cleaver if you have him in the right in the right setup. But I think one of the big things with him is that you do kind of look to getting confirmed kills, getting that invincibility procced on him, because it just makes him operate much better with not having to worry about him taking any damage at all. Now, of course, we also have Chiaki the Echo here. So we're currently right here. Chiaki the Echo, I feel like actually performed extremely well. She does her job extremely well for rotations. Yeah, it's 40% strike prep push, but she also is granting an AoE attack up buff. On top of that, if you already have that attack buff, then she gives the Ave Maria, which is basically going to make it to where your strike prep cannot be manipulated. And then it also will increase your strike prep by 6% at the end of your turn. So you get a little bit of additional love there, which is really nice. Now, we also have Gray. Gray's huge, in my opinion. I feel like he's actually going to be a really solid unit, especially as people start to get more in-game builds on him. Not only is he buffing crit rate, not only is he, again, getting an extra turn off of like his skill 3, which is a defense break, but then on top of that, his damage is actually not bad. He is able to gain strike prep from his skill 1 as well. But I think the biggest things is that you get the defense break, and then you also get that crit rate buff for your entire party. So it lowers your gear requirements if you are building or working your way up. So I feel like he is a solid unit. Obviously not a triple S, but definitely a unit that's going to give you a pretty solid amount of value, but also still be able to contribute to the damage parameters. Rin is another unit that I feel like is going to be extremely high in value for what she does, because she can be paired up with some of the more broken or tankier units in the game and just making them operate better. For example, I feel like she would work extremely well with units like Rahu, for example. She is able to give shield and defense up, which is pretty nice. You could pair her up with Hellkid. She would still work with a unit like him. The other thing is too, you also have the AoE taunt and attack break with her in her skill 3. So that's another value that actually makes her extremely valuable, with being able to lock things down, have a force taunt into her for the damage, and then the attack down means they don't hit her as hard, especially considering that that's what a lot of units typically will scout off of, minus a few exceptions, right? And then the other thing that makes her great is that she's a defense scaler. So her herself would not only be getting more damage, but she'll also be tankier. And that's why I said she could work really well with units like Rahu, for example, because she is also a defense scaler herself, right? Now, outside of that, I think that's everyone for our triple S, double S. We are going to shift into our S tier. So just quickly, just kind of showcasing a little bit of the thought processes with the S tiers. The units, like for example, Valerian underperformed for me, in my opinion. I feel like because they took the shield away from her auto proc for her ability, it definitely kind of took away some of that initial defensive layering that you just kind of started out with, which I think kind of made her not as oppressive, which is okay because it's balanced, right? But again, you still do get some shield there, when an ally takes a turn. So you are able to still get some shield value there as you're moving around. She also can still grant the basic buff, which is either an attack buff, defense up, crit rate, or speed buff. And that's basically based off of whatever buff they don't have. And then on top of that, when an ally is about to die, Valerian is healed for 20% of her HP, and then it ends her Hazy Dream effect. So that on top of the equalizing of HP, she can also gain invincibility with her skill 2 and give heal over time, which again really helps out quite a bit. And then she has the sleep in the S1, right? Now on top of that, okay, we have Leon. Leon, I think, was also in a really weird spot. She's very comp dependent, I feel like, but she can work. Again, the rotations and just her whole kit just kind of can be mitigated if there's a lot of immunity and just things that are just going to be preventative to her absorption, which is really immunity. That's one of the biggest things she's going to have to face, and as well as the tanky comp. So she really is just going to have a setup for her to really work properly. But other than that, she still does what she does: absorbs, rotates skill 2 to finish off, or to kind of burst down enemies, and then you just kind of go from there. Now we have Sutomu, who I felt like actually performed extremely well. He is a buff stripper. I was able to use him, and I got quite positive feedback about his performance because I was the only person in the tournament to actually use him. He is a buff blocker, which actually might give him a little bit more value. I feel like I was being kind of hypercritical myself with his overall performance. I still lost, obviously, so that was just kind of that. But I still felt like his performance was really well. He had really solid attack. He's able to still buffs in the skill 2, which really was helpful with stripping units like Hellkid. And then of course in if I'm not mistaken, the skill 1, he actually is able to do, I think, I think he's able to crit 100%. I think he has 100% crit if there's a debuff on a target. So that's kind of like what you're kind of leaning into with like some of his gimmicks and things of that nature. Now, outside of Tsutomu, we have Chiaki. Chiaki is still going to be solid, I feel like. She offers you some heals, damage reduction, which I think is another really big thing for the AoE heal that she does. The Origami Guardian, I think, actually decreases damage taken by 35%, and it can stack up to 5 stacks, which is huge. She still has a single target heal as well, and then of course she is also able to heal the 2 lowest allies for 20% of their HP with her skill 1. So she just kind of gives you some of that healing potency, and I feel like she could work if you needed to slot someone in for the current units that are lined up. We have Chiaki the guard, who I also feel like is really, really solid. He also is another unit that's able to scale defense. He gives a defense up buff. He also gives immunity, which again, he's one of 2 that does that. And on top of that, he can, if he crits, he's another crit support like Dorothy the Wisher. If he crits, he can extend all buffs by 1 turn. And that's huge, right? So again, this is relying upon how much effect accuracy he has, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, it is kind of interesting how he's supposed to be built, but it works, right? He also can push back strike prep by 20%, and he has a 100% chance to inflict a speed down to a single target, and then he also can reduce crit rate to a single target as well. So not bad. RC77 I feel like is extremely underrated. I don't think a lot of people actually realize what RC77 can do, but RC77 is actually one of the only other units in the game that can extend debuffs. He also inflicts a defense break, and also inflicts a attack break, and also stuns. Yeah, like a lot of value in one skill. Again, I feel like this is something I was like already starting to think about, like, oh man, I could pair him up with my oboe, etc. Like I feel like this guy would work extremely well. Strike prep we have in the skill 2 is a strike prep pushback, and then he also has the chance to extend debuffs to whatever target he's aiming for, and then he also has the accuracy increase of 50% buff, which he's like one of 1 units basically that's able to do that. So it makes it a lot easier for him to land his abilities, considering like even against attribute disadvantage, accuracy is reduced by 50% because of that interaction. So absolutely insane that he's able to even have that in his kit. It's a little selfish with it, but still nice interaction. All right, so that's basically that. Now, really quick, we're getting into our A-B tiers. I will say that with these units, there's a couple of different things. As far as the A tier units, were units that I just felt like were either really niche picks, their values, they would just be much harder to draft, and or their abilities, you're just better off using someone else. So Chloros is one of those units. I felt like he is one of those more niche picks. Would you like realistically pick him over Hoyan? I think it really depends on the fight that you're in, and as well as maybe potentially attribute. I think that again, if you can get away with being able to stack, get away with doing his stack ult, that would be great. But in most scenarios and cases, no one's gonna let you do that. They're not gonna let you have too many multi-hitters to enable him, and they're gonna just get rid of him. He has no death prevention abilities. He would have to be on a team with a reviver. So there's just a lot of things that you would have to factor in to make him work, right? Now with Turandot, Turandot is one of the fastest SRs in the game. Attack up, defense up in the skill 3. I think like with her, the biggest thing is that you not only have that, but you also have the strike prep with the spelling in the skill 2 on a 4-hit. And then she can also increase accuracy in her skill 1 as well. So that is really like, it's good. And if like there weren't other units that you would be prioritizing for their buffing and for them to go first. Attack defense up, I feel like is something that would work a lot better in like PvE. But once you start looking at like PvP, some of the values you're typically going for are more so like the things that like are going to be like the crit rate, the crit damage. You want the defense up for sure because of the units that are currently running the meta, and just from where tankiness. But the attack up, I would say you can get it from another unit that could give you another level of utility as well. So I think that again, it's not a bad combination, but I also feel like it's not really going to be the thing that propels you through PvP. So that's just that. Shadow Sania, I think also with her like biggest gimmick or what she does, she is a DOT detonator or debuffer. Again, she is able to land DOT extend debuffs and then detonate them with her skill 3. I think the biggest problem with her is that a lot of people aren't going to let you draft her. I think if you see an Obel in a Sania, you know that they're trying to nuke you, right? Like, you know that they're trying to DOT cleave you essentially, right? So they're not going to let you do that. At least I would hope. But other than that, I also feel like the other thing is too is that having 2 DOT units in a team can completely like off balance or offset like your overall your choices of who you want to draft or who you want to pick. And it's really hard, I would say, or risky to try to draft multiple DOTs because a lot of the DOTs don't really offer much else outside of what they do DOT wise. And if there's any immunity, then they basically have useless kits and they can't do anything to contribute to the fight. So that's that. Kazuyo, the Revere, I felt like, again, she would be a lot better if there were more sleep units in the game, but there's not really any sleep units in the game. So yes, you can use her as a damage amplifier, which would be great, but there's no other sleep units in the game to make her as useful as you would like to. So unfortunately, that's a unit I placed in A tier. The regular Kazuyo or Kazami Kazuyo, I feel like she's great, but again, there's a lot of pets and things that will help you reduce your cooldowns. So at that point, I feel like you would just be better off slotting in another unit so that you can get more utility for your party. I don't really feel like that would be necessarily worth the slot because you can have a set do that, you can have a pet do that, versus just an entire unit taking up a space, and that could be being used by, you know, someone else. I will say though that she is able to also dispel, but the other thing is too with her dispel is that her dispel is a single target dispel. And I guess also a good thing with it too is it can increase a person's cooldowns, so you do get some utility there, right? Now next up we have let's see, we have Kachi. I think for me the problem with Kachi, it's not that Kachi's bad, I just think that he works in a very specific setup. I've been hearing a lot of people mention him with Gray, but are you realistically going to be drafting him in game? I have no idea. I don't really foresee that necessarily being the case. Some people might be able to. It might work, but I don't see it always happening. Now, we are going to revisit him, though, because I had one person, particularly the homie Brennan, that said he has him in an amazing comp. He works extremely well, and he's going crazy. So we're going to be revisiting him, but I just feel like there's a lot of other units that give you the same values and just do it better, right? Dorothy, I feel like, is great. If you can get her to in-game, she gets more value with in-game scaling gear, and just feels a lot nicer. But again, she is a healer, so that's just kind of that. Yang, I think, is in a similar position with a lot of units. He is more of a like damage dealer. Well, I wouldn't classify him like, he's kind of like damage dealing buffing in a sense. So like he strike prep pushes in the skill 3, but he also can dispel buffs with his skill 3. The other thing is too is that he's able to buff attack and crit rate, which again is a great combination. But also on top of that, you have the strike prep push into skill 1. But again, I think he kind of falls into that weird space where all of his stuff is just basically kind of catered to things or values that other characters can just do extremely well. Again, attack scaling and the attack meta isn't necessarily as crazy right now. It's definitely more stall, tank down, counter cleave. So he could still work in some cases, but I just don't feel like he would work in every single case. Now, outside of that, we also have a couple of different units here that I'm going to give a disclaimer on. I would say that most of the B tier units, we just put them in B tier because one, like Fangus, for example, he's just not a PvP unit. He's definitely more of a PvE unit. Sybil, is not that good. Number 99 also only is really useful for her skill 3. But outside of that, her value just completely diminishes. Vice is not good. Ashu, I would like to tier him higher, but I think one of the things he's going to run into is the stat scaling that comes into play when you start looking at an R to an SSR. He could still work in some comps, but you would have to make him extremely fast, going for the silent and really hoping and praying that, you know, he doesn't really get targeted, because I feel like he'd be really squishy. But again, that's just kind of that. The two Andrews we also put down below as well. Their kits are very, like, they seem like they could be something, but they seem also kind of selfish in the same breath. So put them in B tier. So yeah, that's basically that. Now with these three characters that we have here, lastly, we have Obero, we have the Ting, and we have Victor. These are units that we're going to be revisiting. Bleed, from what I was told from a lot of you guys, she needs to be placed with a debuff extension unit, which makes sense because Bleed scales off of attack. And currently, Obero is the only unit in the game that actually scales off of Bleed. And again, a lot of the things that are counteracting DOTs would directly counteract the bleed proc, considering that she's not able to land as many DOT procs as, like, say, like an Obel. I think that that's where you kind of see some of that, like, value diminish. She is able to stack it 2 times, which is nice. But again, it's based off of damage equal to 50% of your attack. So you would have to have some really solid attack. Victor, again, very selfish kit in my opinion. I feel like a lot of his stuff is all about his own buffing. So, like, it's like damage reduction and additional damage dealt, but it's all for him. Even the proportionate shield that he gives is all for him, not for anyone else in the party. It's converted based off of the HP sacrifice that he does. And then, of course, the single target ability is going to be a ability where he is able to restore 40% of the HP, or basically 40% HP based off of 70% damage that is dealt. So he's supposed to be able to scale, but what's going to be required for that, most people aren't going to really have that right away. And then lastly, for A tier, we have the Ting. The Ting, I think, again, is pretty straightforward for single target damage, but I think, like, for the most part, for what he does, you're really honestly looking for more teams to kind of, like, slow things down, allowing you to be able to sustain longer or survive. He's all about bursting, which I think can become problematic because that means that he's going to be fairly squishy, so it's going to be a little bit harder to try to keep him alive. Again, he has a 450% multiplier with rapid fire, so it's not bad. I think that can still be really nice. He does have follow-up attacks and stuff like that, so he's going to do some respectable damage. And then, of course, his exclusive mark passive is really fun, where it basically makes it to where his next skill will crit against, his critical rate will go up to 60% at the start of his turn. And then any of the excess crit rate that you have will be converted into crit damage. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be able to nuke, but he doesn't really have anything else that really help out with, like, any sustain or just, like, the constant, consistent damage. I would say skill 1 though, vulnerability is pretty good, so increases damage taken by 30%. So he's pretty nasty, I feel like. But I just think, again, he's gonna fall into niche comps. So that's basically that with our PvP tier list. I hope that this was able to simplify and kind of cut down some of the watch time that you would have to watch the VOD if you don't have the time. But again, I am gonna have it linked down below. I hope that, again, this was able to help you guys out tremendously. It's been an absolute blast playing the game, making videos, etc. But that's going to be that with this one, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Everyone, stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.